Hello and good afternoon to everyone. I am Dr. Angela Loy Williams, and I live in Italy, and I work at the University of Pescara in the Faculty of Languages and Economics. I was born in England, and so I was born and raised, but my blood is Jamaican, as my mum and dad were Jamaican. They're not alive anymore. And so I am part of the diaspora, having grown up really with the colonialists, as they say. And from there, I moved to America, where I got married and have two beautiful children. Um, the marriage didn't last, but the kids did. And I'm about to become a grandmother in a few weeks, so that's really exciting. And so, what can I tell you about me? I am very, very interested in PanAfricanism because I think that we as a diaspora must build that bridge with the continent. We must come back together because what has happened over 20 generations, 400 years, 20 generations, is that we have been inculcated with division. And so much so that we think actually that it's normal. It's not. And so if we are to rise and to come out of the quagmire that our grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents found themselves in, it will be coming together and knowing what our strengths are and taking advantage of those strengths. Now, the African, by nature, is very spiritual. That's how we are. Because if it wasn't that way, we wouldn't have the splintering of 5 million churches. So in our souls, we have what we could call the God gene. But we just need to have that work for us by realizing that divisions don't work. It is not protecting your piece of the garden, but it is collectively coming together and realizing that the spirituality is one. And within that one, our ancestors who were very spiritual based everything that they did on spirituality. So mathematics, geography, physics, astronomy, whatever, languages, biology. First, they looked at the spiritual aspect, and then it was the scientific. So if we can get back there, we can begin to lift ourselves up out of this hole that we have been in for too long. You can imagine I am first generation, the ones that came over in what they call the Windrush period, which was the name of a boat that came from Jamaica, bringing the Jamaicans, the Caribbeans, to rebuild England after the war. So imagine that England had been destroyed, and so a lot of its population had been decimated, and so they turned to the Caribbean to help for labor, so that they could help to rebuild war-torn England. But within that, we created our own community. So my house, inside of the house, my mom and dad spoke strict patois, Jamaican dialect. The food and culture was Jamaican. The jokes were Jamaican. We had cricket, so that that's sort of English and Jamaican. And they just basically mixed with themselves. And again, as I was talking about, that Black people, Africans, are very spiritual. And so within that spirituality, growing up in England, there were so many churches. The New Testament Church of God, Church of God in Christ, Seventh-day Adventist, just to name three. And so our parents, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my friends, everybody belonged to a church because that gave our community structure. And so from the age of maybe 3 or 4 up until when I left England, the main part of our lives as Jamaicans, as Caribbeans, revolved around the church. And then there was the other side where I went to the English schools. And so sometimes went to my English friends' houses. And so it was almost like being bilingual, bicultural, because in school we spoke, proper English, and we did, the fish and chips, and the lessons. Everything was geared to the English. It was not geared towards colonialism, except from a conquering point of view. So our history began, I remember being taught that Africans, they had no history, and their history began with slavery. And those that were left in Africa, they had nothing, they had no culture. They were living in mud huts, and swinging from trees. And so for us, it was humiliating, where you saw the greatness of the British Empire contrasted with Africa, the underdeveloped, not developed, never contributing to the human family. This is what was inculcated into us. And so it wasn't until I left England and being thoroughly ashamed of being Black, of course, because they made sure that I stayed in my place because I was Black, so therefore wasn't really worth anything. It wasn't until I went to America and began to attend African American history courses that I got a taste of the contributions that Africans actually had made. And it wasn't that our history began with slavery, that we also had empires, we had kings and queens. We had, technology when the Europeans were still in the caves. I mean, it completely reversed everything that I had grown up with. And so probably that was the beginning of my sort of Pan-Africanism. It took a while because I had to undo all of that programming, let's say, growing up in England, very, very strong programming. So as a Black person in a European colonializing country, and then they have their own people, their own whites that rule Britannia, right? That have a great sensation of pride because they went and conquered the entire world, not realizing the atrocities, because they never teach the atrocities that their people engaged in order to rape, pillage, and steal. For centuries, Europe was ruled by Black people. This is what is hidden. Okay, if you look at Spain and Portugal, also parts of Germany, you cannot really get it with recent history. But if you go back and look at some of the paintings and you read the history, you'll realize that their royal families actually were Black. And so this is something that they're trying to hide. And then once they managed to push out the Moors, which were Black people from Spain and Portugal, the popes gave an edict that I guess it was 1491. I might be wrong with the date. We can check that, but I think it was 1491, 1 year before Christopher Columbus sailed and did a reconnaissance trip to see what he could take. So this papal bull, which is what the name of it is, were told the Europeans, using the Bible, okay, so misusing the Bible, that they could go and conquer the heathens. Okay, it was legitimate because they considered anybody that was not white Protestant Catholic. These two, Protestant or Catholic, but certainly white. A heathen and a pagan. And so this justified their extermination and the raping of their lands, the stealing of their resources, and the enslavement. It started with the Catholic Church. They were the ones that had the first slaves. All right. And the ship that sailed from Africa, bringing the first enslaved, because I don't like that word, enslaved African people, artisans, kings, queens, royalty, right, from the royal courts. That ship was called Jesus. Okay, just to give you an idea. So it came from the Catholic Church. Greed and the non-caring of anything that was not European and white. So this is the basis also of white supremacy. That's the reason why.